Greetings and welcome to In Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. Very happy to be having this conversation looking at parenting and childhood emotional neglect. We're doing so with clinical psychologist Alicia Hoyte. Welcome, Alicia. How are you?
Good to be here, Dike. Happy to be here. I'm good.
And
How are you?
I'm grateful. I'm so grateful that you're able to make the time. And I want to ask your area of specialization and how does that help you to interact with parents and children? Thanks.
Dike, I have been practicing as a master's level clinical psychologist since 2003 in Trinidad. I came back and have been specializing really in psychoeducational assessments. It's expanded to all sorts of psychological evaluations. But in that time, I've had chances with lots of families. And over time, starting to realize that it's not just a learning issue or a behavioral disorder. Many times it's parents who are struggling, many times. And that became my passion along with having my own kids. And so parenting has remained a passion of mine.
Well, look, you want to derail this whole conversation and have me jump a bush already. Now, expand on the fact that that thing that you said, it may not be a learning issue, please.
Of course, you're doing assessments for children who are having difficulties in school, difficulty, behavior, and so on. And very often, yes, there's a real issue that has to be addressed. What I found over time is that I tend to tell parents there are two issues. Whatever is the predominant matter, the learning issue, whether it's ADHD, whether it's whatever, but there's also the child's self-concept. And I've told parents over the years, pay attention to that, and this child will cope with whatever they're dealing with. But if all your emphasis goes on fixing the child and you're not attending to who the child is, you have a losing battle or a more difficult battle. Yeah.
And this actually carries me back to our conversation. We were talking about 12 and under, and one of the persons who placed, there was a note that she was hitting in the chorus. And someone who sings a lot better than they were saying that they're able to hit that note so cleanly because they believe.
Beautiful.
And that being able to believe, I think, is something that we'll talk about in just a little bit. But I wanted to give me some of those core tenets from your understanding of good parenting. And how have any of those changed over the years where you would clinically assess?
They haven't changed, when we think about parenting locally in the Caribbean, we assume the strict disciplinarian. We talk about licks and the buff tone. Yeah, that's what you call more the authoritarian approach to parenting. That's what we know. What occurred recently, as I started visiting schools and talking with principals, they're complaining that parents are more neglectful. So we're assuming that we're still dealing with the strict parent, but we're dealing more with the neglectful parent. It's usually about two parameters you're looking at. You're looking at the degree of warmth and the degree of, let's say, control or structure. And what you really want is high structure and high warmth, right? With that authoritarian parent, you're getting the high structure and low warmth. With the lenient, you might be getting it the other way around, a hugging you, kissing you, but really nothing going on. And what we want is a balance. It's a balance.
That's interesting. And outside of that balance, there's some, there are things that support everything, depending on how it is you look at them.
Yeah.
But there was something that I was reading and looking at that strict authoritarian, more stick than carrot parent sometimes has individuals who are so used to following instructions that they can't clinically address anything when it's just them, and that parent isn't over them overbearing again.
Yeah.
But that emotional neglect, specifically during childhood years, what can it look like? What are some of the ways that you can see it presenting?
We know plenty about child abuse. We could talk about that, right? That is inflicting of harm and inflicting of pain. We know how to look for the signs, and there may be scars and so on. We know less about neglect. Neglect is a failure to provide and a failure to protect. So the child is left exposed, the child is left unattended to. Again, when we think neglect, we might think physical neglect. So their clothes not looking great, they don't have their books. We know about that. Maybe we can attend to that. What we tend to miss is the emotional neglect because it's very subtle. and we don't readily see it. And we're talking now to, usually talk about abuse. Some parents hearing this will go, well, that is not me, thank God. You understand? You could write yourself off, you're not in that. But when we're talking about childhood emotional neglect, we're going across socioeconomic status, we're going across race, we're going across Trinidad. This is a child who has not had, let me just give you the definition, a caregiver's failure to meet the emotional needs during the early years, needs for affection, for attention, for support. Those needs are ignored. The child's feelings are not acknowledged and validated. Dike, you gotta stop me because you start me on my rule, right? When I get a sense of who I am as a child when my experience is mirrored in the face of my loved one. When someone can say, oh, you're sad, you're scared, then I begin to understand what I'm feeling. I have a name for it. And the world doesn't explode because mommy knows and mommy is okay with it. When that is mirrored, I'm just left with a ball of emotion and I have no clue what's going on. It's not validated, it's not mirrored, it's not acknowledged. I don't know what I'm feeling. And a child coming up like that loses a sense of self. An adult coming up like that is not in touch with their emotions. They don't know what they feel or think about things and really can have real difficulty, plenty neurology behind it, and plenty brain chemistry, but have real difficulty getting into relationships.
And you say that, and you say some people, they hear, okay, well, that's what it is, and they absolve themselves. Is it possible to neglect emotionally and not realize? Because I can imagine, someone saying, well, all the things that you need are providing them for you. And part of the reason you don't see me is because I'm making these sacrifices so that you have.
Yeah. So you remind me to say something, Dike. Whenever I talk about parenting, it's never with the intention of criticizing, blaming, or condemning, because people are people, and we don't know what we don't know. And this is precisely how this issue came up. I would go to a school, and the principal would say, "These children have everything in their lunch kit, all the books there, all the books covered." Right? But this child doesn't have anybody to talk to. Nobody's listening. Nobody's sitting with this child. Nobody shows up for parents' meeting. But the child have everything, best toy, best book. So this has nothing to do with poverty even. As I said, it goes across the board and you made a good point. One of the terms used with childhood emotional neglect is that it's transgenerational. There's a very good chance that the parent who is not able to attend emotionally wasn't attended to emotionally. So they don't even know they're doing it because it wasn't given to them. And we grow up lacking empathy, lacking compassion for our children and for others.
And before we go any further, let us take the break because that just sends me in a whole heap of directions. I really glad we're having this conversation, Alicia. Stay with us. We'll return with more after this. Welcome back. We are looking at a range of issues, doing so with clinical psychologist Alicia Hoyte, really parenting and childhood emotional neglect. And you said it's something that spans generations. It's something that spans socioeconomic boundaries. And looking at the fact that that mirror can be held up to different levels. What are some of those factors? What are some of those factors that will help one person be a little more resilient, even though they're operating within those same kind of parameters of being emotionally neglected?
Let me say, and I've seen it in different bits of research, and it gives me great hope. It's been shown repeatedly that all a child needs, and I'm talking about teen, infant, all a person needs is one individual, at least one individual in their lives who is paying attention, who is tuned in. So the key word we want to get to here is attunement. Yeah, I don't know if you remember them. Dike, you're looking too young for this. I don't know if you remember them radio from a long time where you had to tune the dial to get to the right station. Attunement is really tuning into the emotional wavelength of the other person. That takes time. That takes me pausing, seeking to understand what you're talking about, where you're coming from, trying to capture what your experience is, and saying, yeah, I get it. I hear you. I don't have to agree. This isn't about agreeing. This isn't about condoning. This is saying, I can get why you're angry. I hear why you're scared. I can understand that. A child needs that in their life. So even if mommy and this emotional neglect can come from parents who are simply stressed, which is why I wanted to talk about this now. Because coming out of COVID, adults are suffering all sorts of losses and stresses. And the concern is that this is going to get worse for our children. Yeah. So we're talking two things one time. What can cause parents to get like this, and what a child needs to be more resilient, like you said, or to be a protective factor is adults or at least one person in their life who's tuned in.
And this kind of reminds me of a TED talk. Yeah, this educator was saying that children need a champion.
Yes.
So as opposed to that, you sigh. So let me just say, take it away. When you say yes, what are some of the things that go into that yes?
It gives me hope to understand that anybody, a coach, an auntie, an uncle, community police officer who's checking regularly with the fellas on the block, anybody who looks at someone on the street, a young boy, a young person, and says, "How you going?" and pause long enough to get the answer. So when we're talking attunement, we're talking about touch, tone, and tuning in. Taking the time to really be present to another person. Now, that is to help mitigate what is happening at home. What we really want to get to is helping parents understand without criticism or blame. Unfortunately, it's not enough to just provide economically. And that's a hard thing to say to the single mom who just running herself down. It's not enough to just provide economically. We have to slow down, make way in our lives, bring people into our lives who we can trust, who can help be present to our children. It makes a big difference with brain development. It makes a big difference with their future. We're finding more and more that there were studies done. I don't want to get into the studies because your girl could get carried away. But more and more we're finding that persons who are struggling with psychiatric disorders, with addictions and so on, almost all have had multiple adverse childhood experiences. One of those adverse childhood experiences is childhood neglect. So it doesn't sound like much, and our culture hasn't paid much honor and attention to emotions, but we're finding out it's a big deal in the impact on the human person. And so it's just to raise a flag now and invite us to do differently.
It's really interesting. I like the fact that you say pause long enough, because in terms of conversation that I've had with individuals, I'm saying especially during the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, be prepared for coming if you ask somebody, how you going? How are you? Just in the way that I was saying that I really hope that people think long and hard, build capacity, they're ready for answers. Because, you come back from August holidays, or you come back from this vacation outside of school, and you have the thing, write how your holiday was. And then there are people who would have immediate persons in their circles pass because of COVID. Situations dramatically change because financial situations are a little different. So be prepared. But what are some of the other ways that we can tune in a little bit? We can attune to that individual, and they instantly, well, not instantly, but they're more reachable than possibly some of the higher fruits.
You want to try for a 4-to-1 ratio in your communication within your home or within your classroom. We tend to quarrel. You're not perfect. You're going to be upset a good number of times. Aim for a 4-to-1 ratio, 4 positive interactions to 1 negative, right? So nobody's asking anybody to be an angel. Yeah, it's a high ratio. Aim for it. And attunement, like I said, touch, tone, and tune in. It may take moments. It may take of a parent. The big term is co-regulation. We talk about parents have to breathe, because when I calm my breathing, when I lower my breathing, I lower my heart rate. Lovely science behind that. And then I can tune into my child and help my child calm down. I need to be my child's calm in the storm, right? So to get more specific, take moments. They come to talk to you, put down the device. That's the other concern, is the screen addiction that's going up after COVID, right? Put down the device and just pay attention, listen to the question, attempt to answer. We're not adding anything to people's, you're spending time together doing chores, you're spending time together in the grocery, spending time together playing and talking. Tune in. Don't just do it by the way. Tune into the ordinary times that you have with the child. You're driving them to school, you're picking them up from football, you're walking to the parlor to buy a sweetie. Tune in. Take the time to pay attention to what they're saying, ask a question, and listen for the answer.
No, I'm gonna be like Oliver Twist and say I hope we could get more of this, Alicia, because there's so many tangents and stuff you're sending me. Even like looking at the breath. Because I remember somebody was asking Rumi to define the divine, and he was saying the divine is the breath within the breath. So in terms of being able, so in terms of being able to do something consciously yet unconsciously, but doing it consciously to better deal with the situation, and that just listening, taking time, that attunement. Is it possible though, or how possible? What are some of the ways that we can start to deal with that neglect that we may be feeling or have built on and haven't dealt with as adults? Or how do we look at it from that aspect?
Again, you could find a good therapist to sit down and talk to, but you could find a good friend. What I need as an adult who may have suffered neglect, I need to tune into myself. I need to be able, same thing you're doing for your children is what you're doing for yourself. I need to learn to name my emotions. What am I feeling? Where did it come from? I'm upset because, I'm angry because, and I need to own that and accept that. Whether it is for the child I'm talking to or for myself. And then what do I want to do about it? What our emotions are supposed to do is not control or dictate our behavior, but it's supposed to inform our decisions. Now that I understand how I feel, what do I want to do? And what I do ought to be determined by my principles and my values and my moral code, not impulse. So tuning into emotions is not about giving a child what they want. It's not about reacting because of X. It's about being able to access my emotional self and let that feed and inform what I do next. So there's an integration. That's what I'm going for. I want to be a more integrated person. And with a child, I can have that conversation with them. Now that you understand why you're upset, what do you want to do? And help the child journey through a response.
And you say that, and what I hear a little bit is saying almost, you don't want to have yourself in a position where you say, look what you make me do.
Yeah. Come the man.
But at the same time, it's always good. My dad says it's always good to have people invite you back then ask you to leave. So really, I hope we can have another one because that's the time. But we really want to thank you so much, clinical psychologist Alicia Hoyte, discussing a range of things and basically just kind of scratching the surface. So,
barely.
You understand? So, thank you very much, and thank you for the work that you're doing. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you so much for joining us.